The Earth's surface has been mapped and explored countless times over. But go downward, beneath the oceans, below the ice, deep into the rock, and everything changes. These are 20 of the deepest places on Earth, and some of them have barely been touched. Woodingdean Well. In 1858, workers in Brighton, England, began digging a well to supply water to a local workhouse. They expected to hit water at around 120 meters. They didn't, so they kept digging, by hand, using ropes, buckets, and brute force for 4 years straight. When they finally struck water in 1862, they had dug 391 meters into the ground, creating the deepest hand-dug well in the world. The men who worked in that shaft were mostly workhouse residents, including older children. They worked in near-total darkness, lowering themselves hundreds of feet below the surface with no modern safety equipment. When water finally broke through, it rose 120 meters in the first hour alone. The workers had just 45 minutes to climb out before the shaft flooded, a climb that took almost every second of that time. The well is still there today, sitting quietly outside a hospital in Woodingdean. It is deeper than the Empire State Building is tall, and it was dug entirely without machines. The project was meant to save money. Instead, it became one of the most remarkable feats of manual engineering in history, and one of the closest brushes with disaster. Dead Sea. The Dead Sea sits on the border of Israel and Jordan, and its shores are the lowest point on dry land on Earth, roughly 430 meters below sea level. The water itself reaches a depth of 304 meters, making it the deepest hypersaline lake in the world. With a salinity of 34.2%, nearly 10 times saltier than the ocean, nothing can survive in it. No fish, no plants. The name says it all. The salt concentration is so extreme that the water has a density of 1.24 kilograms per liter. That's why people float on the surface without trying. The water doesn't just feel different, it stings, cuts, burns the eyes, and leaves a greasy film on skin. Beneath the surface, the lake floor is lined with thick salt deposits that build up continuously as water evaporates faster than it can be replaced. What makes the Dead Sea more alarming than its depth is the fact that it's disappearing. Water levels have been dropping by more than a meter every year for decades, and the shrinking shoreline has left behind thousands of sinkholes that open without warning. Scientists warn that if the trend continues, the Dead Sea as we know it today may not exist within a few generations. El Zacaton. In the state of Tamaulipas in northeast Mexico, on a private ranch near the town of Aldama, there's a sinkhole filled with warm, sulfurous water and floating islands of grass that drift across the surface with the wind. That sinkhole is El Zacaton, and for decades, nobody could find the bottom. Divers who tried risked their lives going deeper than almost anywhere else on Earth. In 1994, cave diving pioneer Shek Exley and explorer Jim Bowden entered the sinkhole together, attempting to reach the bottom. Bowden made it to 282 meters, a world record at the time. Exley never came back up. He died at around 270 meters, most likely from high-pressure nervous syndrome. The bottom of El Zacaton remained unknown. It took a NASA robot, the DepthX autonomous underwater vehicle, designed to eventually explore Jupiter's moon Europa, to finally map the sinkhole in 2007. The confirmed depth, 339 meters. Scientists found bacteria at the bottom that exist nowhere else on Earth. The water is heated by volcanic activity deep underground, and the entire system was formed not by typical cave collapse, but by volcanic acids slowly eating through limestone over millions of years. El Zacaton is not just deep, it is a window into a world that operates by completely different rules. Crater Lake. About 7,700 years ago, a volcano in what is now southern Oregon erupted so violently that it collapsed in on itself, leaving behind a crater nearly 10 kilometers across. Over thousands of years, that crater filled with rainwater and snowmelt. No rivers feed into it, no rivers drain from it. The result is Crater Lake, the deepest lake in the United States, reaching a maximum depth of 594 meters and one of the clearest bodies of water on the planet. Because Crater Lake has no inflow or outflow, the water has nowhere to go but down. Algae and sediment levels are so low that visibility can extend more than 40 meters below the surface. The water is a deep, almost unreal shade of blue that comes entirely from the depth itself and the way sunlight penetrates the water. There are two small islands inside the lake. One of them, Wizard Island, is actually a cinder cone volcano that formed after the original collapse. What most visitors don't know is that the volcano beneath Crater Lake is not dead. Scientists have identified hydrothermal vents on the lake floor, and heat flow from below keeps small areas of the lake warmer than expected. The Cascade Range, where Crater Lake sits, is one of the most geologically active regions in North America. What happened once could happen again. South Sandwich Trench. The South Sandwich Trench runs through the Southern Ocean, roughly 100 kilometers east of the South Sandwich Islands, one of the most remote and hostile stretches of ocean on Earth. It extends about 965 kilometers in length and reaches a maximum depth of around 8,265 meters at its deepest point, known as Meteor Deep, named after the German research vessel that first mapped it. What sets this trench apart from others is its temperature. It is the only known Hadal zone, any ocean region deeper than 6,000 meters, where water temperatures drop below zero. The salt content keeps it from freezing solid, but the conditions at the bottom are among the most extreme anywhere on the planet. The region is also extremely seismically active, producing regular earthquakes linked to the collision of tectonic plates beneath the seafloor. Before the Five Deeps expedition of 2019, the South Sandwich Trench had never been explored at all. Victor Vescovo's crewed submersible was the first vehicle to reach its deepest point, making it one of the last truly unexplored places on Earth at that time. What scientists found on the way down challenged what they thought they knew about life at those depths. But the trench is so remote that follow-up missions remain rare and difficult. Puerto Rico Trench. Running parallel to the northern coast of Puerto Rico, about 120 kilometers offshore, the Puerto Rico Trench is the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. Its lowest point, the Milwaukee Deep, plunges to 8,376 meters below sea level. The trench stretches about 800 kilometers long and has been open for approximately 70 million years, one of the oldest active oceanic trenches on Earth. The Puerto Rico Trench sits at a complex boundary between the North American plate and the Caribbean plate. Unlike most trenches, the plates here don't simply slide under each other cleanly, they grind and lock, and when they release, the energy is enormous. Earthquakes generated in this zone have the potential to trigger tsunamis that could affect millions of people across the Caribbean and along the U.S. East Coast. NASA has detected a dense mass anomaly beneath the Puerto Rico Trench that actually creates a slight dip in the ocean's surface directly above it. The gravitational pull is strong enough to affect navigation equipment. Despite being relatively close to populated coastlines, the extreme depth and pressure of the trench mean that the seafloor remains almost completely unmapped and largely unexplored. Tagebau Hambach. Not all of the deepest places on Earth are natural. In North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, one of the largest machines ever built has been carving a hole in the earth since 1978. Tagebau Hambach is an open-pit coal mine covering an area of roughly 44 square kilometers, the largest open-pit mine in Germany, and it descends to around 500 meters below the surface, with its lowest point sitting 299 meters below sea level. To create this mine, entire villages were relocated, and 90% of the ancient Hambach forest, a woodland dating back 12,000 years, was cleared. The excavation is carried out by bucket wheel excavators, some of the largest land vehicles ever constructed. Each machine stands 96 meters tall, stretches 240 meters in length, and can move up to 240,000 cubic meters of material in a single day. The scale of what has been removed from the Earth here is almost impossible to visualize. Germany's coal phase-out plan means the mine is set to stop operations around 2029. After that, the pit will slowly fill with water, eventually forming one of the largest man-made lakes in Germany. What was once ancient forest will become open water. Scientists monitoring the site are watching closely because the sheer volume of material removed has changed the local water table, the ground stability, and even the regional microclimate in ways that are still not fully understood. Kidd Mine. About 27 kilometers north of Timmins in Ontario, Canada, sits one of the most remarkable mines ever dug. Kidd Mine, also known as Kidd Creek, is the deepest base metal mine in the world, extending around 3 kilometers below the surface. It extracts copper and zinc from some of the oldest rock on Earth. The ore body it sits on is estimated to be around 2.7 billion years old, making it one of the most ancient geological formations humans have ever physically entered. The deeper miners go, the hotter it gets. At 3 kilometers, the surrounding rock reaches temperatures that would be fatal without active cooling systems. Giant refrigeration units pump cold air through the tunnels to keep conditions survivable. Even so, workers must be carefully monitored for heat stress. The pressure at that depth causes the rock around the tunnels to behave differently than rock near the surface. It creaks, shifts, and can fracture without warning. Scientists studying the rock at those depths have found ancient water trapped in cracks in the stone, water that has been sealed inside for over 1 billion years. Analyzing it has given researchers rare insights into what conditions on Earth looked like before complex life even existed. The bottom of Kidd Mine is considered one of the closest points on land where humans can physically stand and be near the planet's center. TauTona Mine. TauTona Gold Mine, whose name means Great Lion in Setswana, is located in the West Wits region of South Africa and reaches a depth of 3.9 kilometers below the surface. It has been operational since 1962 and contains roughly 800 kilometers of tunnels spread across 3 separate shafts. Just traveling from the surface to the working face at the deepest level takes a full hour by elevator. At nearly 4 kilometers down, the rock temperature surrounding the tunnels reaches around 60 degrees Celsius. Without the massive refrigeration systems running constantly throughout the mine, workers would not survive. The cooling infrastructure alone is one of the most complex engineering challenges in the mine's operation. Even with it running, the deep tunnels remain brutally hot, and workers are limited in how long they can stay at those depths before being rotated to safer zones. Scientists studying the mine have found single-celled organisms living in the rock fluid at those depths. Organisms that survive entirely without sunlight, feeding on hydrogen produced by the surrounding rock. Their discovery changed scientific thinking about where life can exist and raised new questions about what might be living even deeper, in zones humans have never reached. Bentley Subglacial Trench. Hidden beneath the ice of West Antarctica lies the Bentley Subglacial Trench, a vast canyon-like depression that sits 2,555 meters below sea level. It is the lowest point on Earth not covered by ocean water, though it is covered by ice. It was first discovered in the late 1950s during seismic surveys carried out as part of the International Geophysical Year expeditions, and named after the scientist who led the traverse that measured its depth. No human has ever stood at the bottom of the Bentley Subglacial Trench. The only way to reach it would be to drill through more than 2 kilometers of ice above it, and the logistics of doing that in one of the most remote and extreme environments on Earth make it essentially impossible with current technology. Scientists have mapped it using radar and seismic surveys, but the resolution of what lies beneath remains limited. What makes the trench particularly alarming to researchers is its location within the West Antarctic Rift System, a zone of stretched and thinned crust that remains geologically active. Studies have detected abnormal heat beneath the trench, suggesting that volcanic processes may be at work below the ice. If the ice above the Bentley subglacial trench were to melt significantly, the resulting land below would still sit 1.5 kilometers beneath sea level, permanently flooded and gone. Krubera Cave. In the Arabica Massif of Abkhazia, Georgia, there's a cave entrance that looks unremarkable from the outside, but what lies below it is anything but. Krubera Cave descends approximately 2,197 meters into the earth, making it one of the 2 deepest known caves on the planet. It was first noted in the early 20th century, but wasn't seriously explored until Soviet expeditions began pushing deeper in the 1980s. Explorers gave it another name, Voronya, meaning Cave of Crows, for the birds that gathered at its entrance. Reaching the deepest known sections of Krubera requires days of effort. Cavers must squeeze through flooded passages, rappel down shafts, and navigate sections so tight that passages had to be physically widened with tools before humans could pass through. The cave descends almost vertically for much of its depth, and at the lower levels, it floods without warning. Several serious accidents have occurred during exploration attempts. What lies at the absolute bottom of Krubera Cave, and whether it continues even deeper, is still not fully known. Scientists estimate that the pressure of overlying rock limits caves from ever exceeding around 3,000 meters in depth. But that depth record has never been confirmed in practice because nobody has yet found a cave deep enough to test it. Krubera comes the closest of any cave yet discovered, and parts of it remain unmapped. Verovkina Cave. Just a few kilometers from Krubera, also in the Arabica Massif of Georgia, lies Verovkina Cave. At around 2,212 meters deep, it is the deepest cave ever explored by humans. It sits close enough to Krubera that scientists believe the 2 systems may eventually be found to connect somewhere far below the surface. The full extent of Verovkina is still being mapped. After more than 50 years of exploration, teams are still finding new passages. Getting to the deepest point of Verovkina is a multi-day expedition. Cavers camp underground, sleeping in waterproof tents pitched on ledges hundreds of meters below the surface. The cave descends almost straight down before branching out horizontally at great depth, and teams must manage the constant risk of flash floods caused by rainfall at the surface. Water that arrives at the bottom with almost no warning. In 2020, a solo caver descended without the proper equipment and died of hypothermia at 1,100 meters. His body was not recovered for nearly a year. In 2018, a team of Russian explorers reached what was then confirmed as 2,212 meters, the deepest point any human has ever physically descended into a cave. Researchers believe there are branches of the system that descend even further, passages too flooded or too narrow to follow with current equipment. What those passages lead to, and how much deeper the cave system goes, remains one of the great unanswered questions in cave exploration. Denman Glacier. On the eastern edge of Antarctica sits a glacier unlike any other. The Denman Glacier covers an area roughly 100 kilometers long and 20 kilometers wide, and the bedrock canyon beneath it descends to approximately 3,500 meters below sea level, the deepest point on any continent on Earth. It is deeper than almost all of the world's ocean trenches, except the very deepest, and it sits entirely beneath moving ice. Scientists discovered the true depth of the Denman Glacier's underlying canyon using a technique called mass conservation, essentially working backwards from ice flow measurements to calculate the shape of the rock below. What they found was alarming. The canyon narrows and deepens far beyond what earlier surveys had suggested, dropping into a chasm that no drilling equipment has ever reached and that no human has any realistic prospect of visiting. The reason Denman Glacier is of intense scientific concern goes beyond its depth. The glacier is retreating, and because the bedrock beneath it slopes downward toward the interior of Antarctica, meltwater can flow inward, accelerating the process. Scientists have calculated that if the Denman Glacier were to collapse entirely, global sea levels could rise by around 1.5 meters. Monitoring it closely, they say, is one of the most urgent tasks in climate science today. Kermadec Trench. Northeast of New Zealand's North Island, the ocean floor drops away into the Kermadec Trench, a 1,000-kilometer-long scar in the Pacific seafloor that plunges to a maximum depth of 10,047 meters. It is one of the deepest oceanic trenches on Earth, and together with the Tonga Trench to the north, it forms one of the longest continuous subduction systems on the planet, stretching 2,000 kilometers in near-perfect alignment. The Kermadec Trench is formed where the Pacific Plate slides beneath the Indo-Australian Plate. The convergence rate here is among the fastest on Earth. That constant movement generates regular seismic activity, and the trench sits in one of the most earthquake-prone zones in the world. In 2014, an unmanned research submarine called Nereus imploded under the pressure at 9,990 meters while exploring the trench. The vehicle was simply crushed. Scientists have found life in the Kermadec Trench that defies expectations. Giant amphipods, crustaceans that typically grow to a few centimeters in length, reach 34 centimeters at those depths. Snailfish, shrimp, worms, and bacteria have been recorded at some of the most extreme pressures ever surveyed. The trench remains one of the least visited environments on Earth, and most of what lives at its deepest levels has never been seen. Philippine Trench. East of the Philippine Islands, the ocean floor opens into one of the deepest trenches on Earth. The Philippine Trench, also known as the Mindanao Trench, stretches 1,320 kilometers in length and plunges to a maximum depth of 10,540 meters at its lowest point, the Galathea depth. It is the third deepest point on Earth, formed where the Eurasian Plate and the Philippine Sea Plate collide. For a period in the 1970s, it was widely believed to be the deepest trench in the world. The Philippine Trench has been the site of some of the most significant milestones in deep-sea exploration. A Danish research expedition in 1951 used a vessel called the Galathea to take some of the first measurements of this depth, giving the deepest point its name. What they found, living organisms at depths previously thought to be completely barren, reshaped scientific understanding of the limits of life on Earth. The trench is closely linked to the seismic and volcanic activity that defines the Western Pacific. Earthquakes generated along this plate boundary can send energy across the entire ocean, and the forces involved in the subduction here are immense. Researchers continue to study the Philippine Trench for what it reveals about plate tectonics, deep-sea biology, and the long-term stability of the seafloor in one of the world's most densely populated regions. Lake Baikal. In southern Siberia, Russia, sits a body of water so vast and so deep that it defies easy comparison. Lake Baikal is 636 kilometers long, up to 79 kilometers wide, and reaches a maximum depth of 1,642 meters, making it the deepest lake in the world. It holds around 23% of all the unfrozen freshwater on Earth's surface, more than all of North America's Great Lakes combined. And at an estimated 25 to 30 million years old, it is also the oldest lake on the planet. Lake Baikal sits on a rift zone, a place where the Earth's crust is slowly being pulled apart at roughly 4 millimeters per year. That means the lake is not just old, it is still growing deeper. Below the water itself, there are sediment layers up to 7 kilometers thick, placing the rift floor in some areas more than 8 kilometers below the surface. At the bottom of the lake, the pressure and the darkness support life found nowhere else, including the Nerpa, the only freshwater seal species in the world, and translucent fish called golemyankas that spend their entire lives in total darkness. Scientists have found hydrothermal vents at the lake's deepest points, where superheated water rises through the sediment and supports unique biological communities. Russia sent 2 submersibles to the bottom in 2008, reaching 1,580 meters. The very deepest sections remain poorly understood. Beneath the sediment layer, researchers believe the record of conditions on Earth extends back hundreds of millions of years, trapped and waiting. Kola Superdeep Borehole. On the Kola Peninsula in northwest Russia, there is a hole in the ground covered by a rusted metal cap. It looks like nothing. But below that cap descends the deepest man-made hole in history, 12,262 meters, or over 12 kilometers straight down into the Earth's crust. Soviet scientists began drilling it in 1970, not to extract anything, but purely to see how deep they could go and what they would find. It took them 24 years. The further they drilled, the stranger things became. At depth, the rock didn't behave the way scientists expected. Instead of becoming denser and more rigid, it turned almost plastic, under such intense pressure that it flowed slowly rather than holding its shape. Temperatures reached 180 degrees Celsius at depth, far higher than predicted. Hydrogen gas was found bubbling out of the rock, mixing with mud in a way that looked like it was boiling. The drill bit wore out constantly, and progress slowed to meters per year. Perhaps most unsettling was what the drilling found at around 7 kilometers, where scientists had predicted a transition from granite to denser basalt rock. That transition never appeared. Instead, the granite continued, fractured and soaked with water that had no business being there under that pressure. In 1994, extreme heat finally stopped progress entirely. The project was abandoned, the equipment sold for scrap. The hole remains, sealed under that rusted cap, the deepest point any human object has ever been inserted into the Earth. Tonga Trench. In the southwest Pacific Ocean, northeast of New Zealand, the seafloor plunges into the Tonga Trench, the second deepest oceanic trench on Earth and the deepest in the entire southern hemisphere. At its lowest point, the horizon deep, the depth reaches 10,823 meters. The trench was first discovered in December 1952 by the research vessel Horizon, which gave the deep its name. It stretches roughly 2,500 kilometers, connecting at its southern end to the Kermadec Trench to form one of the most extreme geological features on Earth. The Tonga Trench is formed where the Pacific Plate dives beneath the Tonga Plate at one of the fastest subduction rates ever recorded. That violent, ongoing collision generates massive earthquakes and fuels volcanic activity across a wide region of the Pacific. The water temperature at the horizon deep is around 1.1 degrees Celsius, just above freezing, at pressures more than 1,000 times greater than at the ocean surface. In 2019, explorer Victor Vescovo became the first person to physically visit the bottom of the horizon deep in a crewed submersible. Sediment samples from the horizon deep contain communities of roundworms, living organisms thriving at nearly 11 kilometers beneath the surface. Scientists studying the trench continue to find evidence that even the most extreme conditions on Earth are not empty of life. What has adapted to those pressures and over how many millions of years is a question researchers are only beginning to answer. Challenger Deep. At the southern end of the Mariana Trench in the western Pacific Ocean lies the deepest known point on Earth. Challenger Deep reaches 10,994 meters below the surface, nearly 11 kilometers straight down. If Mount Everest were placed at the bottom, its peak would still be more than 2 kilometers below the waterline. The trench was first located in 1875 by HMS Challenger, the Royal Navy survey ship that gave the deepest point its name. Since then, fewer than 30 people have ever physically reached the bottom. The pressure at Challenger Deep is over 1,000 times greater than at sea level, equivalent to roughly 8 tons pressing down on every square centimeter. In 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh became the first humans to descend to the bottom aboard the bathyscaphe Trieste. James Cameron made a solo descent in 2012. Victor Vescovo went deeper still in 2019, setting the current depth record. Despite these milestones, Challenger Deep remains almost entirely unmapped. The seafloor is home to species of snailfish, amphipods, sea cucumbers, and bacteria that have never been found anywhere else. Scientists have also found plastic waste on the floor, a discovery made during the 2019 expedition that researchers described as one of the most disheartening moments in deep-sea exploration. The deepest place on Earth, and humanity had already reached it with its rubbish before it had barely begun to understand what lived there. Lake Vostok. Beneath nearly 4 kilometers of Antarctic ice, sealed from the outside world for somewhere between 15 and 25 million years, lies the largest subglacial lake on Earth. Lake Vostok stretches more than 240 kilometers in length, reaches depths of over 900 meters, and holds an estimated 5,400 cubic kilometers of liquid water. The ice above it is so thick and so insulating that geothermal heat from below keeps the lake liquid despite surface temperatures regularly dropping below -80 degrees Celsius. Nobody knew for certain that Lake Vostok existed until the mid-1990s, when satellite radar finally confirmed what Russian scientists had suspected for decades. In February 2012, a Russian drilling team broke through the final meters of ice and reached the lake surface for the first time. When the drill broke through, pressurized water rushed up the borehole, pushing the drilling fluid out and freezing almost immediately. Scientists retrieved samples from the refrozen water, and what they found raised more questions than it answered. DNA sequences recovered from ice at the lake boundary included bacteria related to known species, and at least one sequence so different from anything previously recorded that researchers described it as something that barely resembled life as science had categorized it. Scientists believe the lake may harbor organisms that have evolved in complete isolation for millions of years, cut off from every other ecosystem on the planet. If life can persist there, in total darkness, under crushing pressure, without sunlight, without any connection to the surface world, it changes the boundaries of where scientists should be looking for life elsewhere in the universe. And whatever is in Lake Vostok, scientists have barely begun to look. Lake Vostok may be the most isolated place on Earth, but it is far from the last mystery hiding beneath our feet. Every entry on this list was unknown to science at some point. The question is not whether more places like these exist. The question is whether we will ever reach them. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more beyond belief facts, click on the video appearing on your screen now and remember to hit the subscribe button.